Welcome back to Vectorworks tutorial number 4. Today we are going to be looking at manipulating and modifying objects in the two-dimensional space. To do a lot of that, you're going to be using this modify menu. Up here is where you'll start to find a lot of your two-dimensional tools. Over in model, the next tab over, are a lot of very similar tools, but they're the equivalent three-dimensional tools. So we'll stay in modify today. That'll give us things like add surface, clip surface, group, ungroup, etc. Let's start looking at some of those actually. Let's draw a couple of shapes here. We got a rectangle and we've got a circle. So, say we want to combine these into a single shape. You could grab your polyline tool and trace all the way around this to create its own shape. You could grab your polygon tool and lasso all of that together to create a shape. You could also simply select them both, come up here into your Modify tab and say Add Surface. And that links them together into a single object. Now the counterpart of that, if that's adding surfaces, would be subtracting or clipping surfaces. No, thank you. So what you do here, you can subtract this shape from this shape. What you would do is select them both and just come up to Modify and Clip Surface. It doesn't look like much has changed, but actually, if we move our circle, you'll see that it has taken a bite out of the rectangle underneath there. Now you'll notice the circle took a bite out of the rectangle. If you wanted the rectangle to take a bite out of your circle, what you'd need to do is change the placement of these objects. They are both on the same plane. They're both on the exact same layer plane, but because we drew the circle second, it appears on top of the rectangle. You can move, similar to Photoshop or something like that, you can stack these and move these around. So you would, the shape you want to move back, you would select, right click, and you can send it either towards the front of the stack or towards the back of the stack. I'm going to send it back, and now it appears underneath the rectangle. Similar, the hotkey for that would be Control B to send it back, or Control F to bring something forward. Control B will send the rectangle back. Control F will bring it to the front. So now if I select these and I clip, you'll notice the rectangle has taken a bite out of the circle. So that is clip surfaces. You can also clip things from within. Clip. And if we delete that, we've got a little hole in our rectangle. When you're working with multiple objects, sometimes you're going to want to move, resize, or modify several objects at the same time. One of the easier ways to do that is to simply group them together. So if you select several objects, you can then group them together. Come into Modify, and here's your group. And now you'll see they're all locked together. So I can move this as a unit. This is handy if you want to move an entire set or an entire scene around the stage. Sometimes you just grab a whole bunch of stuff, group it, and pull it around. If you want to modify things, you have the same kind of nodes that you can use to modify the geometry of the entire group. Now, say you like this group, but you want to just get in and modify one part of it, you can do that. You just right-click onto your group and click Edit. That'll bring up this yellow border around here, and that tells you that you are in editing a component or a group or something like that. So now that I'm in here, I can move this just to right there is where I wanted it to be, and I'll exit, and there's my group, and that reflects the same thing. If you want to ungroup, you can just right click onto the group, ungroup, and now you've got all of your components have been scaled equally, and you can play with them and move them about as you like. The other hotkey to know for this is Control G. That'll group you. You'll use that a lot. The more you get in and start getting lots and lots of objects on your sheet, you'll be in there quite a bit, grouping and ungrouping things to be able to move them around. Another very useful tool is going to be the mirror tool. When you're hand drafting, a lot of times it's difficult or extremely time-consuming to duplicate complex geometry. So what you would do is you would have your shape, just one half of it, and you'd draw a little line, and you'd make a notation that says R and R, or reverse and repeat. And what that means is that you want the exact same image simply reflected on the other side. In CAD, we can do that pretty easy in Vectorworks. You simply grab the object you want to mirror, grab your mirror tool, and then you draw a line as to where that mirror would be, and that'll drop another one on the other side. There are two modes. The first one that I was just using is duplicate mode, so it will duplicate whatever I have. The second mode will not retain the original, so it will simply mirror it, and the first version will disappear. That's useful if, say, you build something, you're like, I like this, but I want it on the other side of the stage. You simply just mirror it over there, and it gets rid of the original. You'll notice when you come in here and you start mirroring stuff, as you drag it around, it will create a little blue outline shadow, and that'll tell you about where it's going to be. Another place that I find mirror very useful is if I'm trying to duplicate something around another object. Say I want this little shape here on all four corners of this rectangle. If it was a regular circle, it would be much easier. I could just Control C, copy that, and then I can just drop it in on each corner. And that's easy enough. But because the shape I'm trying to duplicate is a little more complex, it won't work if I do the same operation, clearly. So, using mirror, this will snap to the center of whatever you're trying to fill. And then you just mirror across the center line. Make sure it snaps. There you go. And that'll fill those in really quickly, really easily. I use this a lot when I'm getting into a lot of my design stuff. So keep this one handy. Another really useful tool is your rotate tool. What this allows us to do is simply turn objects around. With your rotate tool selected and an object selected, your first click will set the pivot point. Your second click will set a line, and your third click, you'll see it rotate there in that blue shadow, and your third click will set it. Say I want it lock in at 45, right there. And you don't always have to select a corner. You can select any part of the object as your pivot point. So I selected the center, select horizontal, and you'll see it will still track around like that. The other option in your modes is to duplicate. So I've been going with just the standard mode, but if you choose duplicate, every time you rotate it, it will create a new one. So you can do some really interesting work with that as well. But that is the rotate tool. Another really useful tool is this split tool. It looks like a little knife. What that allows us to do is to cut through another object. So say I have my little rectangle here, and I want to cut it right through here. You select your knife, and basically you draw a line, and you're cutting right along that line. Right now, I'm in a mode that allows me to pick which side I want to keep. So the first click sets the beginning of your line, second click finishes the line, and then your third click you get to pick which side of this I want to keep. I want to keep that. The other mode I use a lot is line split. That's the center one here. With that, you set your line and cut through, and then you're left with both parts. The one issue when using this in 2D is that once you've cut through something, you're left with a polyline. This is not actually an enclosed shape. If I were to extrude this into 3D space, you'll see it's just the line. It doesn't actually create an enclosed shape. So what you can do is close this back in. After you've split something, you can close it in, just draw a line to finish off that edge. If you select this line and this polyline, as long as they're touching, and if snapping is on, it should be easy enough to get them to touch. You select all of that, and you come up here to modify, and you can compose. And now that is a polygon as opposed to a polyline and a line. And again, if we push this into 3D space, you'll see now that it creates a solid object as opposed to just the line. You can similarly decompose something. So select an object, go to modify, decompose, and now it will be separated out into all of its component parts. So that's compose, decompose, and the split tool. A similar tool to split is going to be trim. Now you'll use that to kind of clean up things. So say I have a rectangle and I have a random line here and I have a circle here. And I'll put no fill on that for now so that we can see what we're doing. So you grab your little scissors here. What that does is kind of clean up the loose ends. So I don't like how this looks a little sloppy there. So I can do that. I want this circle to go away. And you'll notice wherever it intersects something, it is treated as its own piece. So you can, say I want just this odd shape I've created in here. I can trim up all these edges to get this. Again, that's just a series of lines and polylines. But if I wanted to, I could select that now and compose. And now we have a polygon. So that's trim, the little scissors. It's good for cleaning things up a little bit, and split. You can also clip things with this tool. You've got a couple different modes: circle, lasso, rectangle. What you can do there is simply draw in there, and it erases that. Circle one looks like this, and it's just a nice quick way to make shapes. So that is your clip tool. Another way to kind of model things in a subtractive way. Another tool that you'll use occasionally is called combine into surface. So what you can do there, if you have various shapes, lines, intersecting things, whatever it may be, you can bring up combine into surface, and it gives you, oops, I need to select it all. Combine into surface. It'll bring up this little paint bucket, little fill bucket. So you can click into any of these areas to create a new surface. So if I just want this little triangle here, I just click in there, and there's my triangle. Let's say I want this shape in here. You just use your little fill bucket, and it comes in there. The last two tools we'll look at are going to be chamfer and fillet. Basically, what these allow you to do are to put rounded edges or chamfered edges onto shapes. So the fillet tool, you set a radius. It can be as large or as small as you like. And then basically you just select the two edges that are touching, and it'll put that 4-foot radius right on there. And it doesn't have to be a right angle either. So let's say I have an odd shape like that. I grab my fillet tool, click 1, 2, and it'll round it off like that. A very similar tool is chamfer, and that'll put a straight line across here. On this one, you can set how far you want it to cut back. So right now it's set for 4 foot and 4 foot, which means if I do these two lines, it'll take 4 foot off of each line and connect them like that. But you can also change the angle if you want it. The first line to only take off a foot, and the second line to take off 4 foot. The first one I click, it'll take off a foot, and over here it'll take off 4. So it gives it a slightly different angle. And again, those don't have to be right angles either. So that's fillet and chamfer. And lastly, I just want to take a quick second to look at some dimensions. I don't usually use dimensions or text when I'm working in a design layer. I usually save that for once I get towards the end of a project and I'm actually working on layout and putting together my plates for a presentation. But it is handy to know that these are where your dimensioning tools are. Constrained will measure a point from there to there, and it will always be on the 90 degrees. So you just click one point there to there, and that'll bring it across. If you're trying to measure an angle like that, though, you can use unconstrained, and that'll follow the angle. So if you want to know how long this line is, you would use that. If you're trying to figure out the difference in height between this point and this point, you would use constrained. And the height difference is 5.5. So I don't generally do a lot of dimensions on here, simply because I find it in the design layer and in the design process, it clutters things up. There's also an angle in here. So if you want to figure out the angle between this line and this line, there you go. But because I don't like to see a lot of that, usually what I'll use is going to be just the tape measure tool or the protractor. And those will give you the same information. It just won't sit there cluttering up your screen. So if you click a point, just like using a tape measure, another point, and that'll give you the length right there. Similarly, the protractor, click one wall and another, and it'll give you the angle right there, 54.39. So those are good quick references. A lot of times I'll grab those on the fly just to remind myself of what a specific dimension is. It's very easy to use. You also have text options on here. So you just click, hello world, and that's our text. Right now it acts like text. You can change the size, you can change the font. You can do all manner of things, bold, italic, etc., that you normally would with text. However, we also have this text tab up here. If you go into there, you have the option to convert that to polylines. So now our text looks like this. You can ungroup that, and then you actually have just the shapes. You can no longer adjust these by changing the font because it's not recognized as text anymore. It's recognized as polylines. But what you can do then is you can extrude these shapes into the 3D world, or you can manipulate them in the 2D world. So that's why you might want to convert something, a text object, into polylines. And that comes in handy if you're doing signage on a set or something like that. That is the text tool. And that's it for this video. By now, you should have a pretty good intermediate grasp on all the different tools and ways to manipulate shapes, objects, lines, polygons, polylines in the two-dimensional space. So we hope to get to some exercises where you'll be able to put a lot of this into practice. Thanks so much. Y'all have a nice day. Bye-bye.